how does an artist form their way of seeing the world?
It would be the difference between a kind of culture from the outside
Mm.
and a sort of psychology from the inside. My pleasure.
Tell me, David, you have been at the very center of films for decades as an editor of Cinema Journal and through extensive work on Japanese cinema and as a voice that has shaped how we understand filmmakers across culture, but also particularly Kurosawa and Ozu. And your work doesn't just analyze cinema, it actually reveals how films think, how cultures express themselves. And when we talk about Kurosawa and Ozu, and if you had to describe the difference between them in a word, what would that be?
What would there be in a word? I think two words.
Right.
Kurosawa's interested in heroism,
Hmm.
and Ozu is interested in dailiness.
Wow. The dailiness versus the heroism. So, David, Kurosawa was influenced by Western culture, Western literature, and Ozu was more domestic in his approach, the Japanese way of living. What would you think, and how would you see the way their upbringing could have possibly shaped their cinema?
Oh, their upbringing. Well, Ozu was first of all a lifelong bachelor,
Mm-hmm.
which is odd for someone who's made so many films about the necessity of marriage. Uh, he lived he lived a nice life. He had lots of friends at the studio, and he was a big drinker.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a lifelong bachelor,
Mm-hmm.
and Kurosawa was a family man. But
Mm-hmm.
his father and grandfather had come from the samurai class originally, and his father was quite militaristic, though pretty much a decent guy. But both were definitely middle class, not upper class, and they both grew up through the Japanese the old time studio system. But they were at different studios, and
Mm-hmm.
they were subject to some of the rules and regulations that the studios had demanded.
Mm-hmm.
Shochiku, where Ozu was a much more kind of female-oriented studio for the
Mm-hmm.
most part,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Toho was had a range, but Toho you might call a bit more of a masculine kind of studio. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Ozu, of course, was older than Kurosawa, not
Yeah.
much, but a bit older.
Yeah.
Uh, Kurosawa's life was shaped by some incidents in his background.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the He seems to have been more influenced by the tremendous 1923 earthquake, which he talks about a lot. Whereas Ozu, who of course experienced that, never says much. But Kurosawa was also influenced by the suicide of his older brother,
Mm-hmm.
whom he adored.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Ozu apparently had a somewhat trauma-free life, at least until the war. Now,
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, Ozu served in the military during World War II,
Mm-hmm.
but Kurosawa didn't,
Mm-hmm.
which is something I still don't quite understand how that happened, since he would have
Mm-hmm.
been
Yeah.
in his 20s. But Ozu did have some experience in China,
Right.
and that shaped him somewhat. But I mean, he made some films about it. We also think about Ozu as his post-war movies.
Mm-hmm.
But we should remember that Ozu had a tremendously successful career in silent and early sound,
Yeah.
whereas Kurosawa didn't start making films until of course well into the sound era.
Yeah.
And I think that, but I don't know that it makes a difference because Kurosawa is very visually oriented in his narrative style,
Yeah.
uh, but so is Ozu.
Yeah. So, just talking about the East versus the West influence in an artist's life and a filmmaker, Kurosawa was bent towards Shakespeare and Dostoevsky and Ford, and Ozu was more on the Japanese theater, was Zen philosophy. So, how did the cultures shape these two as directors? And was it that Kurosawa was looking more outside and Ozu was looking more inward as directors?
Well, Ozu was very influenced by Hollywood in the silent era,
Mm-hmm.
but in the post-war era, he tended to scale back. Kurosawa did have a kind of dialectic between very Japanese and also Western, because you're quite right in talking about Shakespeare, talking about Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, the
Yeah.
influence of Westerns, particularly his idol John Ford. But I think he always said he was a Japanese director, not a Western director. But I think these influences show up. Also, for Kurosawa, they're very deliberate. He wants to go Western and combine that with Japanese. He's very interested in that. But also, of course, Japan after, well, starting in the late 1890s and throughout the 20th century, was becoming westernized. So to separate them out is a little difficult. Shakespeare, Ibsen, Chekhov was very important to the growth and development of new Japanese theater in the 20s.
Mm.
So, and which Kurosawa was by the 30s very, very influenced by. It's called Shingeki, new
Mm.
theater. And
Mm.
so the westernization of Japan was already underway.
Mm.
So it's hard to just, you know, surgically remove westernization.
Yeah.
But Ozu was, as you say, very interested in a more kind of dailiness that was an ordinary Japanese life. And
Yeah.
Kurosawa was interested in more spectacular, more uh, evil versus good, the possibility of heroism,
Yeah.
uh, men in action. Whereas Ozu was interested, in some ways, we don't think of him that way, but in some ways, Ozu was a kind of woman's filmmaker,
Mm.
which is not a criticism in any way, but he was certainly in his use of actresses, very, very canny about the situation of women. But he was also, in a small way, almost a feminist.
Mm.
But he eventually would say, look, this is how Japanese life, this is a kind of continuity, and it's very important that we proceed as we have.
Mm.
So women in some ways must pull back from their kind of rebelliousness.
Mm.
And it's a well-known fact for Kurosawa,
Mm.
the, the only interesting women that he had in his films were villains.
Yeah.
So, which I don't think he thought of women as villains, but he was
Yeah.
able to inject a lot of power into women that were bad girls.
Yeah. 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 I know what you're saying. So tell me, David, the way they were seeing things as two different artists, is it a kind of reflection, or let me just put it this way: how does an artist form their way of seeing the world? What are the things that could possibly influence these two great artists to see and to film and to put across stories in a certain way which are so dramatically opposite but yet both bewildering?
It's a very good question. It would be the difference between a kind of culture from the outside
Mm.
and a sort of psychology from the inside. But
Mm.
also, an artist has a will, a kind of free will,
Yeah.
and so they are able to, I don't want to say impose, but certainly inject their desires, their styles, their ways of thinking onto something. But sometimes, of course, it could be unconscious.
Yeah.
And other times it's I want to tell this kind of story and I want to tell it this kind of way. Now, as Ozu and Kurosawa were both very consistent. I mean, Kurosawa was more experimental, but within
Mm.
that experimental, he had a consistency, whereas Ozu in the post-war years was remarkably consistent. I mean, his ways of putting a film together over and over and over. So
Yeah.
obviously that's very deliberate. But you could say there's some unconscious elements in there.
Mm-hmm.
And for Kurosawa too, there's a struggle. Also, we have to remember that for Kurosawa, after around after the early 1960s,
Mm.
he began having troubles with the studio system, which had been
Mm.
declining,
Yeah.
whereas his filmmaking was becoming very, very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were limitations imposed upon him.
Mm.
And when he sought Western financing,
Mm.
people don't tend to talk about it much, but certainly when he had Western financing, there would have been some kind of pressure on him
Yeah.
to take into consideration an international audience.
Yeah.
Now, Ozu died in 1963, just as the
Mm.
Japanese cinema had declined, and he never had to deal with the shifts, both in the studio system, but also as the culture was beginning to change. Ozu could resist that because it wasn't so big. Ozu had a decent audience his whole
Mm.
career.
Mm.
He was very successful. He wasn't the most successful film director. He wasn't like a Steven Spielberg in terms of the box office,
Mm.
but he had a consistency uh, that he would have lost had he continued making the same kind of movies after 1962, which was his last film.
Right.
Because by that time the culture had changed, whereas Kurosawa was caught up in that as a relatively young man. He was only in his 40s as the culture really shifts around him.
Yeah.
So his output between 1943 and 1963 is 3 times greater than his output after 1965.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he made two-thirds of his films before 1965. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
Ozu in the silent era made a couple of films a year.
Yeah.
And even in the sound era, where he always made at least one film a year, it is a couple of years where he made two.
Mm. Yeah.
But when the studio system declined, Ozu would have been in trouble.
Do you think, David, that at that point, what kind of challenges would these two artists, Japanese filmmakers, must be facing when it came to financing of films? Do you think they were also, like right now, filmmakers are going through immense challenges, not just algorithms, AI challenges? At that point, what kind of challenges would Kurosawa and Ozu be facing to tell the kind of stories? Where they at any point fighting for the kind and the way they want to tell their stories? Like Ozu does not move the camera, he goes to the tatami shots, and Kurosawa's camera movements are all over the place. So I mean, such wide difference in the way they're seeing things. What kind of challenges were there?
Well, Ozu was lucky. He stayed at Shochiku for his entire career. Now, there was a couple of films, I don't know exactly why, but he made 3 films in the post-war era at outside of Shochiku.
Mm.
So it's possible that they didn't want to make that particular script. But his budgets were very, very modest.
Mm.
All the big budgets besides actors, was location.
Right.
He liked to go on location. I mean, Tokyo Story, remember, is on the west, all the way on the west coast of Japan.
What kind of modest budgets, if my just button, if you have any sort of figure, if just for the audience?
Yeah, there are a few hundred. Well, of course, they were in yen, but there were a few $100,000.
Right.
And
Oh,
they
okay.
grossed, they tended to gross 10 to 20% more at
Right.
least.
Right.
Some films were big. Now Kurosawa had problems. Uh, not, I mean, he had problems with budgets after 1965, so
Yeah.
that's why those giant films like Ron. Well, remember in 1976, his Oscar-winning film Dersu Uzala is a Russian movie.
Mm.
It was financed and made and about in Russia.
Mm.
In fact, when it won its Oscar as a Russian film,
Mm.
not as a
Oh,
Japanese
not
film.
as a Japanese film. Yeah.
And then people like Scorsese, Spielberg, and George Lucas
Yeah.
helped finance Ron and Kagemusha.
Mm.
And then after that, he had a hiatus, and then he made three very low budget movies. Whereas for uh, for Ozu, he didn't have to worry about it because of the studio system. Also, Kurosawa had some commercial failures in the 50s, and
Mm.
Toho, excuse me, seeing his budgets rise,
Yeah.
was very concerned about that. So not only did he have to keep budgets a little bit lower to some extent, but he also
Yeah.
had some commercial considerations that Ozu didn't have. So after he had a flop with, say, Throne of Blood, he said, "I'm going to make me a commercial movie." So he made Hidden Fortress, which was a
Mm.
smash.
Mm.
So there was Yojimbo was a hit.
Yeah.
So he needed to think about that with his high budgets. Ozu
Right.
was lucky. Not all of his films did the same, but they were modestly budgeted. They had a modest return. He used big stars. People liked him. Critics liked him. So he just kind of proceeded in a way that was almost unique in that he could make what he wanted,
Mm.
with one, as I say, a couple of exceptions where he went to different studios.
Right.
But again, he was lucky. Kurosawa had to be concerned more with box office because of the high
Scale of
budgets.
it. Yeah, for the scale of his films, he had
The
to be
scale.
more concerned about high budgets. One consistent question comes in mind is that how does an artist deal with failure? How did Kurosawa, or any perspective that you would have, dealt with the failure of his films not working at the box office?
Well, when he was reasonably successful in the 50s, sometimes very successful,
Yeah.
he had a finger on the pulse. So if he tried something that didn't work, like The Lower Depths was a total failure, uh, but he could rebound. But when he made, I mean, it's quite famous when he made Dodeska Den, which was in some ways the last of his studio films.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a hiatus between 1965 and 1970.
No.
But that hiatus is because they wanted him to work, he wanted to work in Hollywood, and Hollywood wanted to work with him on
Mm.
Tora, Tora, Tora.
Mm.
But he went way over their ideas,
Mm.
and he was basically fired from Tora, Tora, Tora. So he
Mm.
goes back to Japan, forms a company with a couple of his friends,
Mm.
and the first film they make is Dodeska Den, which is
Mm.
Kurosawa's first color film,
Mm.
and it's a total flop. And he makes what I think is a kind of half-hearted suicide attempt. Now, clearly, he was depressed.
Mm.
I think if he wanted to commit suicide, he would have succeeded, sadly. But he was very depressed.
Yeah.
He doesn't make, and that the company, that's the only film they make.
Yeah.
So these four big directors form a company, and they only make one movie. It's Dodeska Den. It fails. That's the end of the company.
Oh my God.
Most of the other directors, see, after 1970, the old timers from the war years and the post-war years are getting out of touch with the Japanese cinema,
Mm.
with the Japanese audience. So some of them are reasonably successful, like Ichikawa
Mm.
Kanzoke. But
Mm.
Kinoshita Keisuke is not. Kobayashi Masaki is much less successful, only has one kind of hit. So they're in a different generation, and Kurosawa's kind of struggling, and
Mm.
he gets the lucky break where Mosfilm sends him to the steppes in Russia, and he
Mm.
makes this magnificently epic film, intimate yet epic, called Dursa Uzala,
Yeah.
and that puts him back on the map. But he's not consistent. He doesn't make a film every year. He makes 5 more films in his career
Yeah.
after 1976, but he doesn't die until the 90s.
Mm.
So
Yeah. So
it's yeah.
there's
Of
a
course,
big.
yeah. It's not
Mm.
so easy, I think, for old men to make movies, or didn't used to be. Now the old
Mm.
timers
Mm.
make movies, but Kurosawa is lucky in that he gets financing from overseas, but
Yeah.
eventually, as I say, especially his last 2 films,
Yeah.
Dreams is a pretty big budget, but Rhapsody in August and then Madadayo, they're very modest.
Mm.
And I don't think they're particularly successful, but they get overseas distribution,
Yeah.
and at least he gets to work. And then for the rest of his life, he doesn't make any more movies.
Would you think, or would you see it this way, that Kurosawa's audience was international and Japanese, and Ozu was mostly making films for the Japanese audience? Do you, by any chance, would sort of think like that when it came to their films or the financing of their films?
When Seven Samurai was sent to, well, Rashomon, of course,
Yeah.
uh, but that had a big impact on Japanese cinema in general, made them look more Western, but not
Mm.
Ozu. Shochiku
Mm.
never distributed, an Ozu film widely, only in festivals. Tokyo
Mm.
Story was shown in one place in America, in one place in the UK.
Right.
He wasn't sent to festivals. Like when I say festivals, I mean Cannes, Berlin, and Venice.
Right.
Kurosawa was a favorite at Venice.
Right.
So once he got festival success and overseas success,
Mm.
somewhat,
Mm.
he did have an eye toward the West. What can I do? And that's why I think he combines Eastern and Western, so to speak. He wants to speak to the
Mm.
Japanese audience. He has something to say. You take Throne of Blood, which is really very, very Japanese, not only in its use of no theater,
Yeah.
but in questions very subtly of democracy.
Yeah.
You know, but as a Shakespearean adaptation,
Yeah.
it's got at least a big festival play.
Yeah.
Whereas Ozu didn't get any prestigious festival play. Shochiku thought that he wouldn't get any success.
Yeah.
So it's like Ozu is kind of like, let's put him on a train, and he's like, at every stop he's releasing a new film, and it doesn't. He's just doot, 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 film, 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 film. And Kurosawa is like, oh, what am I going to do next? What could I do?
Yeah.
Uh, so that I
Yeah.
think that's the difference. But
Yeah.
Shochiku was completely uninterested in sending Ozu. Now they did say he was too Japanese.
Yeah.
That turned out to, of course, obviously be wrong, because
Yeah.
we wouldn't be talking about Ozu if he was never successful
Yeah.
in the West,
Internationally, in the West and
internationally.
internationally. So Hitchcock was constantly thinking of his audience when making his films. And do you think at any point did Kurosawa and Ozu analyze their films, saying that this is where the audience is going to react, and this is how I want the audience to react, and which is why I want to place the camera on the tatami mat, or this is why I want to give it this dramatic movement? At any point through your understanding of both these great filmmakers?
Yeah, Ozu was certainly consistent in his style. I mean, the consistency uh, across dramatic content means that he just did what he did. But
Hmm.
when one or another of his films wasn't as successful, he
Yeah.
would go back to the formula that worked before.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Whereas Kurosawa was always concerned with commerciality.
Mm.
Even if he was experimental, he thought
Yeah.
maybe there might be a way to find an audience. But that's why, as I say, when Throne of Blood and Lower Depths were failures, he needed a hit.
Right.
Toho was putting pressure on him to say, "Look, we can't afford you anymore
Yeah.
unless." So he makes the Hidden Fortress.
Hmm.
He makes Yojimbo.
Yeah.
Remember that the only time Kurosawa made a kind of direct sequel was with Sanjuro, the follow
Hmm.
up to Yojimbo, even though the stories are completely different and set in different times. But that's because Yojimbo was a big hit, and he
Yeah.
wanted another hit so that he could make a couple of his own movies. It's almost like in the studio era when John Ford wanted to make The Informer, uh, and Fox said no, we'll lend you to RKO to make The Informer, his Oscar film, but when you come back, you got to work with Shirley Temple and make Wee Willie Winky. So so there's trade offs. For Kurosawa, the trade off was we need a box office hit. For Ozu, it was like I never heard of Shochiku complaining about Ozu.
Yeah.
People don't talk any longer, apparently, about Mizoguchi.
Yeah.
Uh, but in the 50s, he was more popular in the West than Kurosawa was.
Mm. Okay.
But he was a more independent. He went from studio to studio. Some of his films were financed outside. He used big stars, but he wasn't very successful. He was famous, but he wasn't very commercial.
Yeah.
And he didn't get quite so many prestigious prizes as did Kurosawa and Ozu.
Yeah.
But he's also, you have to remember that these guys are, you can't say somewhat unique, but let's say unique in their ability to do pretty much what they wanted. So even when Kurosawa makes Hidden Fortress, which he deliberately wanted to make commercial, which is why
Yeah.
I think it's actually one of his weaker films, though people love it.
Yeah.
He doesn't abandon the Kurosawa elements, right? It's Hidden Fortress is clearly a Kurosawa movie.
Right.
It just happened to be very successful.
Yeah.
So that was good for him.
Yeah. Yeah. David just mentioned Kurosawa elements. Kurosawa elements. I'm gonna just come back on that. If you had to define Kurosawa versus Ozu, who would you say is a more radical filmmaker?
Well, the radicalness of Ozu is always given in its relationship to Hollywood.
Hmm.
That Ozu's use of space, his camera placement, his let's call it use of narrative time,
Yeah.
his often de-dramatization.
Yeah.
Not always, as I say, Tokyo Twilight or early spring. It's hard to remember. Late autumn, early spring.
Yeah.
These are, but especially Tokyo Twilight, they're very dramatic. People
Hmm.
die, people, suicide.
Hmm.
But the Ozu that we know and love is very undramatic, very narratively casual. The use of space, of course, is what people have come to particularly admire. But the radicalness is relative.
Right.
Now, no one in Japan made films that quite look like Ozu, but many times you see the breaking of the 180-degree rule, 360-degree space. Narrative ellipses, of course, are all over the place. So his radicalness is relative. Also, he may be radical, but he's not like an experimental filmmaker. When you see an Ozu movie, you can understand it.
Yeah.
You might say, gee, that guy was on the left and now he's on the right. but it doesn't go, what happened? What's going
Yeah.
on? I don't know what they're talking about. So he's you can understand him. The
Right.
same thing, of course, with Kurosawa, but Kurosawa, I think, is more experimental, and I don't want to use the term radical, but if you think about it, how many filmmakers of various kinds has Kurosawa influenced? See, I think Kurosawa is the most influential filmmaker
Most.
in the world,
Yeah.
and that's because his style
Yeah.
is varied, and no one can move a camera like him. I call Kurosawa's editing dynamic.
Yeah.
He's got a dynamism, and
Yeah.
sometimes the use of camera movement and editing together, which was not very common, right? To cut on camera movement, that was different as well. But they were both unique in their own way,
Yeah.
and that's what people admire, and that's what makes them great auteurs, just like Hitchcock,
Yeah.
who's
Yeah.
who's probably who's probably the second most influential filmmaker ever.
Yes. So, David, tell me. So if we do not know whose film we are watching, but if we just understand the elements being used in the film, we can say this is a Kurosawa film and this is a Ozu film. What kind of elements did these two great filmmakers have? These two great artists use that makes it so unique in its way.
Ozu is very quiet,
Yeah.
very presentational. I
Yeah.
think it would be impossible to watch 10 minutes, if not less, of Ozu and not know it's him.
Yeah.
Impossible.
Yeah. True.
For Kurosawa, I would say maybe the same thing, but maybe it would take 15 minutes. And that is because you would see men in action, men acting a certain way, or men struggling in certain ways.
Yeah.
You could probably tell the plot of an Ozu. You can pick a 10-minute segment from an Ozu movie and get the plot, the whole thing. Kurosawa is much more, narratively influential. You don't know
Mm.
what's going to happen from one moment to the next, but
Yeah.
within those moments, he's just so creative. I taught both Ozu and Kurosawa when I was an active teacher, retired now. But when
Yeah.
I was an active teacher, I taught both of them. And when you teach them, you really, really look at the films carefully so that you can tell students, look at this, look at this, look at this.
Yeah.
And for both of them, there are so many elements
Yeah.
that you can find, whether it's in transitions from scene to scene in Ozu's case, or in Kurosawa's case. How does the camera get closer to a
Yeah.
figure? How does Kurosawa manipulate the space of the scene?
Yeah.
So they would be very identifiable, even if you'd seen 10 Kurosawa movies and then I showed you a scene from a one that you hadn't seen and said, "Who's this director?" And of course, you'd never mistake Kurosawa for Ozu, and vice versa. Never.
That's for sure. That's for sure, David. But if you had to say who was more successful, do you think that this is even a question worth asking when we see two great artists here saying, how do you judge who was a greater artist or a more successful artist? Do you think we should even ask this question?
Well, the thing with movies is that you can always point to the commercial elements.
Yeah.
You can always point to audience. And Ozu never had a commercial release,
Hmm.
right? A Hollywood studio like RKO, uh, which released a number of Kurosawa's movies. Ozu never had that.
Hmm.
Now, Kurosawa didn't make a tremendous amount of money in the West, except for, I mean, Ran was probably his most successful movie. Believe it or not, Seven Samurai was not a hit when it was released. It was released,
Hmm.
and Yul Brynner saw it and said
Yeah.
that would make a good Western. And so he developed the Magnificent Seven.
Yeah.
So Kurosawa made a lot of money when people bought the rights to his movies.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of being, it's very hard to say. I mean, it's almost like comparing a Renaissance artist with an Impressionist artist.
Yeah,
I mean, who's a greater artist?
it's
Uh,
difficult.
it's just very difficult. Now,
Yeah,
I think you can't say who's more influential. Well, you
yeah.
can point to, I mean, Ozu's been very influential over the last 30 years.
Hmm.
Kurosawa was influential over the last 70 years.
Hmm.
So Kurosawa continues to be influential. Ozu's more of a, we call it the art cinema.
Yeah,
And when you go to the art cinema, Ozu is all over the place. But
yeah,
when you go to the genre cinema, the commercial
yeah,
cinema,
yeah.
Kurosawa's all over the place.
Hmm. But do you think both these filmmakers, do you think, how would you define ambition? Both of them were ambitious in a way, but who do you think, or how do you think an ambition should be defined in an artist? Is it about scale or is it about depth?
Ah, it's a very good question.
Hmm.
I think that Ozu would say I have depth, but I don't know that he was particularly ambitious. No,
Mm,
no one ever talks about did Ozu feel badly that nothing of his cinema was shown in the major festivals
yeah,
overseas.
yeah,
Did he care?
yeah,
But he knew he was successful. But as I
yeah.
say, he almost seems self-contained.
Wow.
He and his screenwriter go off to an inn, work on the script, get drunk,
Yeah,
go back, go back to make the film.
yeah.
Uh, some locations, but mostly he. My theory is that Ozu, uh, the Shochiku Studios used to be halfway between Tokyo and Kamakura.
Hmm. Hmm.
So he would be at the studio and he'd say, well, let's go shoot in Tokyo. So they'd go that way. Let's go shoot in Kamakura. They'd go that way.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then occasionally go further away. But he was very self-contained. I think he was pretty modest. Whereas Kurosawa was definitely ambitious.
Hmm.
I mean, starting from the time well, he was always culturally critical.
Yeah.
He really wanted to say something about the culture, and
Yeah.
often as a critique of it. But
Hmm.
when he made Seven Samurai, there was no turning back.
Yeah.
He really, really wanted the fame and the success and the ambition. I mean, he could have, after the failure of Dodeska Den, he could have taken the same attitude that he took after the failure of The Lower Depths, which is,
Hmm.
I better make a commercial movie
Yeah.
instead of trying to slit his wrist in the bathtub. So I think he was very conscious
Is- Yeah.
uh, of
So,
his.
so you just
Yeah.
mentioned the words aggressive and ambitious, and he wanted commercial success, Kurosawa, whereas Ozu was more modest and he was self-contained. In fact, his epitaph reads as "mu," which is stillness. So, what kind? If I had to ask and try and understand, what kind of ambition should artists have, or should they even define an ambition when actually everything comes from within for an artist?
Well, it's interesting because an artist might be different from, say, a craftsman
Yeah,
or a filmmaker.
yeah,
How many filmmakers think of themselves as artists?
yes,
And if you think of yourself as an artist, I think you really want as much self control over the project as you can get.
yeah,
But in film, even today, when you can release a film, you can make a film for a few $1,000s and put it on YouTube.
yeah,
But if you want to be a major commercial filmmaker, there's always an audience to
yeah.
consider. And the whole marketing. I had a friend who worked for George Lucas up in San Francisco for a while. This was a little bit before the 10 sequels to it.
Mm,
And she was so disillusioned
mm,
when production meetings were really marketing meetings, and the marketing meetings were really, what kind of toys are we going to get out of this film? And how much, which is called merchandising. Now,
Right.
fortunately,
Oh,
fortunately,
okay.
Ozu and Kurosawa and
Yeah.
Hitchcock didn't have
Yeah.
to worry about merchandising.
Yeah.
But, if you think of yourself as an artist, it becomes difficult to put yourself in the position of, do I have to think about toys when I'm
Yes.
making this film?
Yes. Yeah, that's such a, yeah, so blatantly and well put, David, out there for this anecdote. This is such an important thing. How should we classify ourselves as artists, and or versus if we are going at the level of scale, you there will be considerations for toys and marketing gimmicks. But as we move into a very new era of filmmaking, David, which is AI driven cinema, which might take up a lot of space in the coming years when it comes to filmmaking, do you think we will still be capable of producing works that are as deep as Kurosawa and Ozu? Do you think that cinema will lose their cultural specificity? Do you think that, film festivals might just become irrelevant or occupy very small spaces in the coming years?
Yes. I think that independent cinema, whatever that might mean,
Yeah,
is still capable of making lovely movies,
yeah,
right? It's possible, and it's always a pleasure to see a small film. So people will want to tell human stories. But when you ask the very good question about cultural specificity, I would say that major Hollywood movies have no cultural specificity insofar as the cultural specificity is this is the international culture. And what do we know about America from major Hollywood movies? We know that America is this massive commercial engine, and that's why most people, especially the older I get, the less interested I am in most Hollywood movies, is
yeah,
because they have nothing. They
yeah,
have nothing to say.
yeah. So, moving forward, David, what is that one thing that could be most scary for you as you see a complete shift that might happen in the next coming years?
Yes, I think that the theaters will survive only on blockbusters.
Hmm.
And the difference between the small art theater and the commercial chains will only grow. And where I live now, there's an art theater
Yeah,
whose most programming is middle level commercial movies.
yeah,
They rarely, I mean, I'm in Tucson. I'm not in LA or New York or San Francisco anymore.
yeah,
But the other thing is they tend to show commercial films, say three-quarters of their programming. The other thing is they keep asking for donations to keep them alive. So that's
yeah,
very difficult for them to survive just
yes,
on an audience of art movies or
yes,
even middle level commercial movies.
yeah,
So for me, who used to go to see almost everything back in the 70s and 80s,
yeah,
especially the 70s,
mm,
uh, I find myself. I have a. There's a AMC has a program. You pay
mm-hmm,
$30 a month,
right,
and you can see 4 movies a week, right? So 16 movies a month spread out over there, right? It's a great deal.
right,
Do you know that half the time I look to see what's playing, there's nothing I want to see? And I think of it as free since I paid the $30 already. I think of it as a free movie and there's nothing I want to see.
mm,
And that's the real thing is that the movie business has become more business
yeah,
than art. And the only time you
yeah,
hear about art is at the Academy Awards, which only pays lip service to art. That's why they have the
right,
the blockbuster category, even the
right,
even the even the Golden Globes. Best movie that made money.
right, yeah,
So it's a real difference. And if you want my real opinion, the art for the last 10 years and maybe still going forward has been on streaming television. TV.
Right. You really think that?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I'd much rather watch TV than, I mean, there's the occasional movie,
Right.
but three-quarters of what I watch, I mean, I have 9 streaming services, and
Hmm.
having seen a lot of the old movies, between new movies and TV shows, I take TV.
Wow.
Much more
Yeah.
interesting. Much
Okay.
more interesting. Much
That
more
says a lot.
interesting. Yeah.
That says a lot. What you just said, and just to sort of on a note to end the episode, David, if you had to advise the artists to remain true to yourself with the era that we are coming in, the filmmakers, the artists, how should they place themselves in the world, and which side should they tilt towards to get their art out there, but also to keep their soul intact?
Yes. If keeping their soul intact was is not a big problem or issue for most filmmakers, I think they'd sell themselves very happily for a $500 million box office gross. But I think it's the same thing as a novelist, and that is tell a good story as best you can for what you think you want and need to tell. Whatever medium you use, theater, film, television, uh, you should make what you want. And I think if it's good, there's a real good chance it'll show up. It may not
Right.
gross to 500 million, but it
Yeah.
should do well enough that you can continue. But a lot of people, they go to film school or they want to be directors. They want to be famous. They want to be auteurs.
Yeah.
But what they do is they write what Hollywood has already made.
Right.
And of course, it's obvious. I mean, sequel, 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 prequel, prequel. Uh, my wife has said she was a Marvel fan back in her younger days, Marvel Comics.
Right.
And she says, do we really need to see yet another reboot, yet another origin story of Spider-Man? Can't we tell a story, even if you want to do Spider-Man, maybe there's a
Yeah.
way to make a good Spider-Man movie instead of telling the origin story over and over and over and over.
Totally. Totally. Thank you so much, David. I so appreciate you taking our time and doing this. And this was such a fun episode with the laughter and the insights. And I really, really appreciate your time.
Well, it was my pleasure, and I hope it's of some use to your audience. And I thank you again for thinking of me.